Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at the Ottoman Empire, period 5, 1750 to 1900. In period 4, the Ottoman Empire was this amazing, enormous empire that covered 3 continents. It developed the trade routes, it had architecture, all sorts of technology, and it was one of the greatest empires in existence. But that's going to start to change as we shift into the next time period, period 5. Why? Because of 2 things, imperialism and industrialization. And we're going to see how those 2 major themes affect the Ottoman Empire here in period 5. If you follow along now in your notes, we'll be filling those out as we go. This map, you can see the extent of the Ottoman Empire at its zenith, at its greatest, and it certainly covered a large span of land. But it becomes, too big for them to handle logistically, and without modern technology, it's going to be almost impossible to keep it all together. So first, let's take a look at some of the problems. And one of the problems is going to be internal. And that problem is something called fratricide. Fratricide was a law passed by the Ottomans that made it mandatory that once a sultan comes to power, that sultan must kill all of their brothers. Pretty brutal. And right around this time period, that practice was stopped, and it might have actually had a negative effect. All right, so take a look at this video clip I'm going to show you, and you'll see how this the banning of fratricide, or the stopping of fratricide, may actually have a negative effect. So take a look at this.
The 46-year reign of Suleiman the Magnificent marked the peak of the Ottoman Empire. For 2.5 centuries, through the reign of 10 sultans, the empire's growth had been fueled by the spoils of war. Now there was nothing left to conquer.
It simply wasn't possible to keep on conquering. There had to be a change. They were up against borders in Europe, and they were up against borders with Iran. They were going to waste their budget on unnecessary wars.
Constant campaigning had honed the Ottoman war machine into an invincible force. Now idle, it declined rapidly, failing to modernize either its tactics or technology.
By the end of the 16th century, the Ottomans actually are surpassed by their foreign enemies, and they lose that military edge.
Sultans no longer led their armies in battle.
The Sultan is no longer the warrior king on horseback leading his troops on the frontiers, as they were in the reign of Suleiman. The Sultan basically stays in Istanbul and is the figurehead in a system that really is being run and controlled by others.
In that system, the military and civil institutions that were so effective in building the empire proved incapable of maintaining it. By the late 16th century, the Ottoman Empire, unable to meet the challenge of change, entered a centuries-long period of slow decline. One by one, its institutions failed. Among the first, the Ottoman tradition of dynastic succession. Fratricide may have been brutal, but it had served the Ottomans well, providing an unbroken string of 10 powerful sultans.
One of the things that contested succession did, crude and barbaric as it seems to us, is it tended to eliminate weak candidates to rulership. Name me any European monarchy that had an unbroken succession of 10 able kings.
In 1595, the most violent dynastic killings in the history of the empire put an end to fratricide. Mehmet III came to power after murdering 19 young princes.
The wails and cries of the people of the city were doubled and tripled on this funeral. They simply could not bear to see this procession of coffins coming out of the palace. Some of them are this big. So it must have been terrible. And I think that was one of the pressures that persuaded the dynasty to stop doing fratricide.
Okay, so I think it's interesting to see how this policy of fratricide, which we would see today, is pretty barbaric, but getting rid of that might have actually hurt their empire. Kind of an interesting thing to think about. Now, there were other problems as well, and some of those problems were with the Janissaries. Remember this elite group? You see the picture there as well here on the PowerPoint. These guys were the elites, right? They were the most intellectual, the cream of the crop, and yet they really didn't want too much change. And so they got very comfortable in their position, and we'll see how that becomes a problem later. Also, corruption starts to happen. With these weak sultans, people take advantage of that. In all parts of the bureaucracy, there's skimming of taxes, there's all sorts of other cheating going on. So corruption is going to really weaken the empire from within. And then, of course, you have that, competition, economics. Now that you're no longer controlling the trade routes as much as you used to, or they're not as important anymore, and you're not industrializing like the Europeans were, they had a hard time keeping up. And as a result, they become very dependent on some of the European goods that were coming in through the trade routes. Again, the last one there is the Janissaries, who started to lack leadership. They lacked resources, modern weaponry, and now they're going to do everything they can to keep their position in society. And you're going to see they get very desperate many times to keep their position because they're threatened by modern technology. So these are some of the internal problems. Then, of course, the external problems we have are battles. First, they failed to take Vienna in 1683. And then we see the Russians, who are always looking to push their influence into the Mediterranean, go to war against the Ottomans in what's called the Crimean War. And the Russians probably would have won if not for the help of the British and the French, who did not want the Russians upsetting the balance of power in Europe. So they end up fighting the Crimean War against the Russians, and they do end up stopping them from taking over Istanbul and totally crushing the Ottoman Empire. All right. Other things that kind of exposed the Ottomans to not being modernized, especially in terms of military, which used to be their thing, right? They were the great military power that swept across the Europe and Northern Africa, etc. But now the group in the Egyptians, the group in Egypt called the Mamluks, who actually defeated the Mongols, faced Napoleon, right? Who they called a donkey boy. But this donkey boy comes over there and defeats them rather easily in a bunch of battles. He's only chased away because the British don't like him there, and they chase him out of there and back to France. But nevertheless, this showed the Ottoman Empire how far behind they were with these losses to the French, and then of course the Crimean War. They started to realize that they were not what they used to be, and something had to change. And of course the Greeks, they gained their independence in 1830, the Serbians 1867, and so you have now, if you look at this map, especially out in the frontiers, right? The frontiers, they're starting to chip away and leave the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire does not have the means or the resources to keep those areas under their control any longer. Some of these areas, like Serbia, will gain autonomy, eventually gain their own independence, like Greece. Egypt gains its own autonomy under the leader of a nationalist named Muhammad Ali. Wait, not the boxer. Okay, yeah, and that's not the right Muhammad Ali. Oh, yeah, there he is. But this Muhammad Ali was not trying to knock out Sonny Liston, right? This Muhammad Ali was actually trying to knock out probably the Ottoman Empire. Okay, this is him a little older as well. And you can see what he wanted to do. Maybe he was the first one to start doing it in a leadership position, was to modernize the military. And by doing this, he does end up gaining some quasi-independence or autonomy for Egypt. And we'll talk more about this later, but he does bring up the question of nationalism because he is definitely pushing this sense of Arab nationalism and even to a certain extent Egyptian nationalism. So how does nationalism threaten empire? This is something we need to consider, especially going in from period 4 to 5 and then 5 into 6, this new concept, this European concept of the nation state and its impact on empire. And the Ottoman Empire also gets caught up in the external geopolitical struggle that's happening in Europe with the huge land empire of the Russians and, of course, the great sea-based empire of the British kind of competing for world power. And the Ottomans, the sick man of Europe now, as they're known, are caught in the middle. And this, the Crimean War, the rise of Muhammad Ali, these things really allow the Ottomans to start realizing that they are not the powerful empire they used to be, and something needs to change. Selim III, one of the sultans, he believes that, hey, we need to change things if we're going to keep any sense of autonomy. And so he starts to attempt to modernize the military. Unfortunately, the Janissaries don't want this, and they revolt against him. End up capturing him, and yeah, you guessed it. Oh no! They kill Selim III. I don't believe they actually cut his head off. They preferred strangulation, and they killed him that way. And unfortunately, this really showed the next Sultan, Mahmud II, that he had to be a little more careful if he was going to modernize. And he did want to carry out the reforms of Selim III, and so he starts to create a secret professional army instead, so the Janissaries don't know. But this brings up a big question with the Ottoman Empire, is this loss of identity. And so the Ottomans don't even know who they are anymore. And so can you really have a Muslim people modernize without sacrificing their essential religious character? Because now you had some bureaucrats, some politicians who wanted to create a new modern Western-style government, a constitution, these types of things. Others want to go back to the old ways and, hey, we're not traditional enough. That's when we were great. That's when we were successful. Let's go back to that. And then others just like their position, don't want to change anything, and feel threatened by it. So this identity crisis becomes a major problem, something we've got to think about. And for the Muslims, can they still be a religious group, but yet have a secular government based on a constitution? It's an interesting dilemma that a lot of Muslim countries still face even today. And now Mahmud II realized that he had to get rid of the Janissaries once and for all. And when they found out he was creating this secret professional army, of course, they revolted. But he tricked them into an alleyway and slaughtered them all. Okay, killed all the Janissaries, hunted down those that weren't there, killed them, and then went to the families of the Janissaries and destroyed and killed all of the wives and children of the Janissaries. So totally eliminating the Janissary class for good. And again, brutal, but yet I guess efficient for him to create a modern Turkey, or not really a modern Ottoman Empire. And he also gets rid of this big turban that symbolized the sultans for so long, and puts on the fez as a more modern hat, modern look, and starts to create what's known as the Tanzimat reforms, the modernization of the Ottoman Empire, creating a westernized university system, creating a national bank, postal systems, telegraph systems, new university and classes in science and math, a written constitution based on European ideas. And unfortunately for women, not too many reforms for them, but I guess eventually, just like in the West, those reforms would come. Even if you look at what they end up doing later on, is they move out of the Topkapi Palace, which was the palace for sultans for so many years, and now develop this new Western-style Dolmabahce Palace. And so even with the hat, with the architecture, they're showing a more egalitarian view of ruler to subject, right, or is more constitutionally based society, as opposed to the sultan who tells everybody what to do. So a big shift in thought, but not everybody was on board with that. Later sultan named Abdul Hamid would come to power and not want to westernize everything about Ottoman society. Yes, he'd want to westernize the military to keep him strong, but he gets rid of the constitution, gets rid of all the Tanzimat reforms, and flushes all these freedoms that these people have been gaining over the years. He is challenged by a group called the Young Turks, these army officers who end up forcing him to call parliament, right, to open up the constitution again. Eventually, Hamid is removed from power totally, and the Young Turks take over. The Young Turks are extreme nationalists, though, and believe that part of the problem of this society are people who are non-Turks. And so they start pushing out others, especially Armenians, who get caught up in what some would call a genocide. The Turkish government still challenges this usage of the word, so it's controversial. But nevertheless, these types of changes are going to lead right into World War I. And the lead of this man, Kemal Ataturk, the father of modern Turkey. So with this knowledge right now, just take a look at these two questions on your sheet. discuss them, think about them, write an answer down. We'll see you tomorrow.